Hello, my name is Sandra. I'm 69 years old, and for years I lived trapped inside a body that felt heavier with every breath. I was always tired, weak, and frightened of the pressure growing inside my chest. But every time I tried to speak up, my husband, a respected cardiologist, shut me down with a cold stare and a sharper voice. "You're making it up. Stop creating problems," he'd say, as if my pain were an inconvenience instead of a warning. I started to wonder if maybe he was right, if maybe I was imagining everything, until the day I couldn't take it anymore. I went to another doctor, desperate for someone to truly listen. The moment he looked at my old tests, his expression changed. The frown on his face told me more truth than my husband had given me in years. And when he learned who had been treating me, his voice dropped into something firm, almost urgent. "We need to redo everything now. What I'm seeing should never have been ignored." Someone finally saw me. Someone finally listened. In that instant, my world shifted. Because if he was right, then the person I trusted the most had been lying to me. But what exactly had he been hiding? What else would I uncover? Stay with me, because the truth behind this story is far deeper than I ever imagined. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your messages and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story truly began. I have spent years trying to convince myself that what I felt in my own body was nothing more than age, stress, or the ordinary erosion of time. It sounds unbelievable now, even naive, but when someone you love insists repeatedly, confidently, that nothing is wrong with you, eventually you begin to doubt your own breath, your own heartbeat. That is what my life had become. Doubting myself one symptom at a time. The exhaustion came first. Not the kind you shake off with a nap or a cup of coffee. This was a heaviness that lived inside my bones, a quiet weight that made even rising from bed feel like lifting a stone door. I would pause in the hallway, hand pressed against the wall, waiting for the dizziness to settle. Sometimes I imagined my heart as a tired bird, flapping its wings unevenly inside my chest. But whenever I tried to speak of it, Christian would smile, that polished physician's smile, calm, superior, untouchable, then place his hand on my shoulder as if soothing a child. "You're imagining things, Sandra." Another doctor would just laugh at you. He said it with such certainty that I would shrink a little inside myself every time. Christian Mitchell, respected cardiologist, admired by patients, colleagues, donors. My husband of 40 years. How could he be wrong? And if he wasn't wrong, then it had to be me. My nerves, my tendency to worry, my inability to age gracefully, as he once phrased it with a half-smirk. He kept all my test results in his office, locked away so I wouldn't stress over them. He would disappear into that office for hours, emerging with short explanations that said nothing at all. "All normal, you're fine, it's just menopause lingering. Don't start spiraling again." His tone always carried that faint edge of disappointment, the kind that said I should know better than to bother him. But lately, the symptoms had worsened. Tightness in my chest that wrapped around me like a fist, breathlessness after climbing a single flight of stairs, nights where my pulse hammered so loudly I pressed my fingers to my neck just to feel whether it was real. When I told Christian, he didn't even look up from his laptop. "Stress," he said. "You've been emotional. You do this every few years. Every few years." As if my suffering followed some predictable cycle of female irrationality. I walked away from him that night feeling smaller than ever. My friend Linda was the first person who actually looked at me, really looked. We were sitting at our kitchen table, drinking tea, when another wave of shortness of breath hit me. She watched my hand fly to my chest. She watched the fear in my eyes. And unlike Christian, she didn't dismiss it. "This isn't right, Sandy. You're pale, You're sweating. Why hasn't he done more tests? I tried to defend him. Habit, I suppose. Loyalty pushed into me like a commandment. He has. He says everything is fine. Linda didn't believe it. She reached across the table and held my hand, her thumb rubbing circles on my skin the way one comforts a trembling child. I'm making an appointment for you, she said, and you're going. I don't care what Christian says. I wanted to protest, but something inside me cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but quietly, like a seam opening. That's how I ended up in the bright, unfamiliar hallway of Easton Memorial Hospital, waiting for a doctor I had never met to look at tests I had never seen. My hands were cold. My stomach twisted the way it used to before final exams in college. I kept expecting Christian to burst through the doors, scolding me, pulling me back home where he controlled every answer. Doctor! Rachel Morrison called my name, and the moment I stepped into her office, I sensed something different. She looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me with steady, compassionate eyes. She asked about my symptoms. She listened, truly listened. I felt both relieved and exposed. When she pulled up my previous test results, I had never been allowed to view, her expression changed almost instantly. Her lips pressed together. Her brow tightened just slightly, the kind of micro-expression doctors rarely allow themselves. We need to redo everything today, she said softly. What I'm seeing here should never have been brushed off. My heart seemed to plummet into my stomach. Brushed off? I whispered. By who? Her eyes flicked to me, searching my face. Who was your previous doctor? When I said Christian's name, something shifted in her entire posture. Not shock, not surprise, more like recognition of a puzzle piece falling into place. Still, she swallowed whatever thought had flashed across her mind and said, with professional calmness, "All right, let's focus on you for now. We'll take this step by step, step by step." As if I could even stand on solid ground anymore. The tests took hours. I watched ceiling tiles blur past as nurses wheeled me from one room to another. Every beat of my heart felt loud, foreign, untrustworthy. For the first time I wondered, what if Christian wasn't protecting me from worry? What if he was protecting himself? After the final test, I walked out into the afternoon light, blinking hard. The world felt too bright, too sharp. Linda waited for me in the parking lot, arms crossed, concern etched across her face. Well? She asked. I don't know yet, I said. She'll call me soon. But something inside me already knew. Something deep and long silenced had woken. I sat in the passenger seat, staring at my reflection in the window, the faint lines around my mouth, the gray threading through my hair, the fear tightening my expression. For years, I had trusted Christian more than myself. I had believed his every word. But as the car pulled away, I felt a tremor run through me, subtle but undeniable. What if the truth about my heart was something he never wanted me to know? I felt the truth long before Dr. Morrison spoke the words. Even as I sat across from her desk the following day, my palms damp against my skirt, I sensed a shift in the air between us, something heavier, more real than anything Christian had ever allowed me to feel. Her face was calm, but there was a tenderness in her eyes that made my stomach twist. People don't look at you that way unless they have something difficult to say. She folded her hands slowly, carefully, as if steadying her voice before using it. Sandra, she began, gentle but unwavering, your tests show a serious heart condition. It's treatable, but it has been progressing for at least 3 years. 3 years. The words fell like stones into the silence between us. My breath caught, shallow and quick. I tried to speak, but only a thin whisper escaped. 3 years? She nodded, her expression softening. Yes, and your symptoms were textbook. This should have been caught immediately. Textbook. Immediate. Should have been. A strange buzzing filled my ears, like my own body was trying to shield me from the truth. But it seeped through anyway, soaking into every part of me until I felt cold from the inside out. My hands trembled in my lap. Not violently, just enough for me to feel the betrayal trembling along my bones. I thought of Christian, his confident smile, his dismissive tone, his warm hand guiding me away from discomfort rather than toward relief. All those nights I lay awake, clutching my chest while he slept peacefully beside me. All the times he shushed my fears like they were childish fantasies. All the times he said nothing was wrong with me, nothing at all. But something was wrong. Something he had known, something he had chosen to ignore. "I don't understand," I whispered. He saw the tests. He said everything was normal. Dr. Morrison's eyes flickered with something like restrained anger, but she kept her voice steady. These results were not normal. Not even close. Whoever interpreted them either missed something critical or chose not to acknowledge it. I knew then, with painful clarity. Christian hadn't made a mistake. He hadn't overlooked anything. He had looked directly at the truth and turned away from it. And he had turned away from me. When I left the hospital, the world felt different. Too bright, too loud, too fragile. Linda hugged me tightly in the parking lot, but I barely felt her arms. I was too consumed by the echo of those 3 words, 3 whole years. By the time she drove me home, my heart felt like a cracked vase, still upright, still holding its shape, but fractured beneath the glaze. Christian wasn't home when I walked in. His car was gone. His office door, usually left slightly ajar, was shut completely. Something about that door pulled at me, tugged like a stubborn thread unraveling a sweater. Unease guided my steps down the hallway. Or maybe it was desperation. Maybe I needed proof evidence that my heart wasn't betraying me, that my memories hadn't turned themselves into accusations. The doorknob felt cool under my hand, and when I pushed the door open, the familiar scent of his cologne greeted me, clean, sharp, authoritative. His office was immaculate, as always. Papers aligned, books arranged by subject and height. A framed photograph of the 2 of us on our 20th anniversary sat on his desk, the glass so polished it reflected my face back at me. I barely recognized myself, eyes red-rimmed, mouth tight, shoulders curved inward. My gaze drifted to his desk drawer, the bottom one, the one he always kept locked. My heart pounded as I knelt beside it. I didn't have a key, but I had something better. Suspicion sharpened into courage. I reached behind his printer where he hid a spare set of office keys, and there it was, taped beneath the metal shelf, exactly where he thought I would never look. My hands shook as I peeled the tape away. When the lock clicked open, it felt like something inside me clicked open too. Some part of my mind that had been sealed off by trust, fear, and habit. Inside were folders, stacks of them, neatly labeled. 2 neatly. I pulled one out, then another. My name appeared on several tabs. I opened the first file, breath caught in my throat. There were test results sold, yellowing at the edges. Heart scans, reports, notes. Christian's handwriting scrawled across the margins in his unmistakable blue ink. Mild, no intervention needed, no intervention needed. The words blurred as tears rose quickly, unbidden. I blinked hard, trying to steady my vision. I flipped to the next page, tracing the lines of an old echocardiogram. I didn't understand the medical terminology, but I recognized the highlighted areas, the ones Dr. Morrison had circled earlier that same day. I pulled out my phone and compared the images. Same date, same scan. Christian had written, "Follow-up optional. Patient worrying unnecessarily." Dr. Morrison had written, "Immediate treatment required." I stared at the 2 interpretations, side by side, my breath growing thinner and thinner, as if my lungs couldn't bear the weight of the truth sitting inside them. A choice. It had been a choice. He had chosen to ignore this. She had chosen to watch me fade, to watch me struggle to breathe, to watch me doubt myself. He had chosen his convenience, his pride, or something far darker over my safety. My fingers trembled violently as I lifted my phone and snapped photo after photo. His notes, the scans, the discrepancies. I documented everything because I needed to hold on to the truth before he tried to bury it again. By the fifth photo, my hands were shaking too much to hold the phone steady. I set it down, pressing my palms against the carpet, trying to ground myself. My heartbeat thumped unevenly, too fast, too frightened. For a moment I felt like I might collapse under the sheer intimacy of the betrayal. I had trusted him with everything, my health, my life, the quiet vulnerability of every fear I had ever confessed, and he had turned that trust into a weapon. I pressed my forehead against the edge of the drawer, eyes closed, breath trembling. A soft, broken sound escaped me, half a sob, half a release. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. And knowing that truth hurt more deeply than the diagnosis itself, when I finally stood, knees trembling, I did not feel weak. I felt wounded, yes, but something else was unfurling beneath the pain, something small, glowing, stubborn. The first spark of a new truth. If he had chosen silence, then I would choose the truth. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the half-dark of our bedroom, staring at the ceiling, while the soft hum of the air conditioner filled the silence Christian had left behind. He was sleeping at the hospital, or so he'd said, on call, an excuse that once would have calmed my worry. Now, it only deepened it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those test results. His handwriting, his lies, the truth I had photographed sitting like a weight in my phone, too heavy, too real. Just before dawn, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I flinched at the sound. For a moment, I thought it might be Christian's some excuse, some deflection, some gentle manipulation wrapped in a loving tone. But when I picked it up, an unknown number glowed on the screen. I hesitated. Something inside me braced, as if my life had begun splitting in two before and after, and the moment I answered this call, there would be no going back. Still, I pressed the phone to my ear. Hello? The voice on the other end was shaky, but determined. A woman's voice, young but worn around the edges. Is this Sandra Mitchell? I froze. Yes. Who is this? A pause, a breath, a quiver she tried to hide. My name is Jennifer, she said quietly. I'm one of Christian's former patients, and I think you need to hear this. My heart lurched. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was as if the room had shrunk around me, pressing in on my chest the way my symptoms often did. A former patient? I whispered. What do you mean? She exhaled shakily, and I could almost picture her sitting somewhere. Phone clutched in trembling hands, trying to build the courage to say words she wished she didn't have to. I don't want to upset you, she began, but I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I didn't know how. Your husband, he doesn't make it easy for people to get in touch with you. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. What happened? There was a soft rustle on her end, as if she was wiping her eyes or steadying herself. He told me I was very sick, she said. A rare condition, something that required experimental treatments, very expensive ones. I gripped the edge of the bed so hard my knuckles whitened. Experimental? Yes. Her voice cracked. He made it sound like I would die without them. And I trusted him. He's so confident, so reassuring. He said catching it early was the only reason I had a chance. I felt nausea roll through me. Christian's face flashed in my mind, calm, authoritative, kind when he wanted to be, cruel when it benefited him. What happened next? I asked, though part of me already knew this story would not end gently. I spent everything, she whispered. All my savings. I sold my car. Took out loans I'm still paying off. My parents helped. My sister. She sold her engagement ring. Her breath hitched. I went through months of treatments that made me sick in ways I can't even talk about. My throat closed. I pressed a hand over my mouth. And then, she continued, voice trembling, My symptoms didn't match the diagnosis. I got scared, confused. I went to a different cardiologist. A long, painful pause. They told me I was completely healthy. There was never anything wrong with me. I curled forward, elbow on my knee, fingers gripping my forehead. This couldn't be real. No one could be that monstrous. No one who had shared my home, my bed, my life for 40 years could do something like that. You're sure? I whispered, even though I knew the answer. Yes, she said. I have the documents. I have everything. Silence stretched between us, fragile and trembling. Finally, I found my voice again. Why are you calling me? A soft sob escaped her before she could swallow it down. Because it wasn't just me, she said. There are others. A lot of others. Women he scared. Women he lied to. Women who trusted him because he was respected and charming and convincing. I pressed my hand against my heart, feeling it flutter unevenly beneath my palm. How did you find me? I asked. It took weeks, she admitted. Every time I tried, the call was blocked or redirected. I think he has something set up at his office. But last night, one of the women in our support group said she'd heard rumors about you. She told us Christian's wife had been sick and that you weren't getting better. Her voice softened, almost breaking, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Support group. The words echoed inside me like a bell struck too hard. How many are you? I whispered. 8, she said. At least 8. Those are just the ones who found each other. There could be more. There probably are more. A wave of dizziness washed over me. But not from illness. This was emotional, visceral, the kind of vertigo that comes from discovering the ground beneath you has always been unstable. That the person you leaned on was the very force pushing you off balance. My mind raced back through years of unexplained phone calls, odd charges on our credit card statements. Evenings Christian came home late smelling faintly of antiseptic and expensive cologne. I had thought he was simply dedicated, overworked. I had admired him for it. But Christian wasn't just neglecting me. He was exploiting vulnerable women for profit. Women who trusted him, women who feared dying, women who believed every word he said, just as I once had. My God, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. I'm so sorry. You don't need to be sorry, she said softly. You're a victim too. A victim. The word tightened around my throat. I had spent years telling myself I was overreacting, being dramatic, being foolish. Now I understood that every doubt I'd ever had about myself had been crafted, shaped and sharpened by the man who vowed to protect me. Jennifer, I breathed, thank you for telling me. Truly. I'm here if you need anything, she said. All of us are. If you ever want to talk to the group, we'd welcome you. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The house felt too still, too polished, too staged, like a life carefully arranged by someone who needed to control every detail. Everything I thought I knew about Christian began to crumble, piece by piece, until I felt like I was staring at a stranger hidden beneath the face of the man I once loved. But beneath the shock, beneath the heartbreak, beneath the betrayal, something else stirred. A quiet, steady flame. Resolve. For the first time in years. I felt myself standing not because Christian steadied me, but because I refused to fall. Fold had cracked open, and through the cracks light was finally beginning to seep in. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before I could convince myself to step out. The late afternoon sun had already sunk low behind the church building, staining the parking lot with soft orange light. My hands rested on the steering wheel, trembling in a way I couldn't control. I had rehearsed the name I would give. Simple, forgettable, safe. Still, the idea of walking into a room full of strangers and hearing my private nightmare echoed back at me made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. But I went. I had to. Inside, the meeting room smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner. A circle of metal folding chairs waited in the center like something prepared for confession. 8 women were already seated, each of them carrying the same mixture of exhaustion and determination in their expressions. They looked up when I entered, curious, not judging, and I forced myself to smile as I quietly settled into an empty chair. "Welcome, the facilitator," a soft-spoken woman named Leah said. "We're glad you're here." I nodded, unable to speak yet. My throat felt thick, like if I opened my mouth I might cry instead of introduce myself. The women began sharing. One by one, their voices unfolded stories I had never imagined, hearing stories that sounded like mine. A woman with short silver hair spoke first. "I was told I needed a pacemaker," she said. "But the second doctor I saw said my heart was perfectly fine. He asked who gave me the original diagnosis. I couldn't even say the name." Another woman, maybe in her early 60s, wrung her hands together as she talked. "I kept telling him my symptoms didn't feel right, that something was off with the medication. He dismissed me like I was hysterical. I ended up in the A twice." A third woman described waking up from a surgery she later learned had not been medically necessary. She stared down at her bandaged hand as she spoke, as if afraid her own body might betray her again. Each story felt like a quiet blow to my stomach. The room was filled with nodding heads, soft murmurs, and the nervous tapping of shoes on the floor. No one interrupted. No one rushed anyone. It was the first time I had seen a group of people sitting together in their pain without explaining it away. Then Margaret spoke. She was 73, delicate and elegant in a way that made her look almost fragile, though her voice carried remarkable steadiness. She leaned forward slightly as she talked, hands clasped together on her lap. "My daughter's a medical lawyer," she said, "and she told me very clearly that what he did could put him behind bars." The room fell silent. Somehow, those words spoken so simply, so calmly made everything real in a way the other stories hadn't yet. It was no longer just moral wrongdoing or unethical behavior. It was criminal, punishable, something that didn't have to stay buried. One woman inhaled sharply and shook her head. "But who's going to believe us? He's respected, connected. He speaks at conferences. He has friends in every hospital," another woman added. "I heard the board dismissed a complaint about him last year. Said it was insufficient evidence." Their fears echoed one another, building a wall of invisible weight in the middle of the room. I felt it pressing on my chest, a familiar pressure, like all the days Christian had stood by my bedside and told me I was imagining things, that I was fragile, that I was lucky to have him monitoring my health at all. I could hear his voice even now, the cold gentleness he used when he wanted to make me doubt myself. "Sandra, sweetheart, you worry too much. Just let me take care of it. You don't need to trouble yourself with the details." It wasn't love. It had never been. It was control disguised as concern. My palms grew damp. My heartbeat thudded against the inside of my ribs. I didn't plan to speak. I had told myself I would just listen for the first session, observe, learn. But the words rose anyway, raw and shaking. He did it to me, too. 8 heads turned toward me at once. Their attention wasn't sharp or invasive. It was understanding. It was full of the kind of empathy only people who had been through the same darkness could offer. I swallowed hard and continued. "I came here under a different name because I didn't know if I was strong enough to say it out loud, but I am." He manipulated my medical records. He lied about my symptoms, convinced me I was sicker than I was. And I think he's been doing it for years, not just to me. No one spoke, but the nods, the softened gazes, the gentle murmurs of support, they held me up in a way I had never been held before. I took a steadying breath. I'm going to help expose him. All of you. Your stories. They matter, and I promise I won't let them be ignored. A quiet exhale rippled across the circle. as if the collective air in the room had shifted. Something inside me shifted too, a thread of fear giving way to something firmer, sturdier. Leah, the facilitator, smiled softly. "Thank you for your courage." For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't drowning alone. After the meeting, I sat in my car again, but this time, I didn't tremble. I opened my notebook, the one I had hesitantly brought in case. I felt brave enough and began writing. Notes, dates, names, symptoms, patterns, everything the women had said, everything I had lived through. Every inconsistency I remembered from Christian's explanations. Every moment when something inside me had whispered that something was wrong, but I had pushed it aside because he told me to trust him. Page after page filled with details, ugly truths, painful memories, pieces of a puzzle that I was finally ready to assemble. By the time the sun disappeared completely and the sky turned indigo, I had written so much, my hand ached. But I kept going, because for the first time, I wasn't writing to understand my suffering. I was writing to stop his. I spent the next week pretending my world hadn't shifted. I still made coffee the way Christian liked it, still folded his shirts with the crisp edges he preferred, still let him kiss my forehead as though that small gesture were proof of anything tender between us. Every time he touched me, I had to steady myself, reminding my heart and my body that I wasn't living in the same story anymore. I wasn't the woman who trusted him. I wasn't the woman who believed he had ever truly cared for me. But I became very good at pretending. I moved through the house like an actress on a familiar stage, offering small smiles, asking about his day, nodding at the right moments. In the quiet spaces, when he wasn't looking, I continued documenting everything. His patterns, his phone calls, the way he locked his office door more often now. My nerves felt like thin wires vibrating under my skin, but I smiled anyway. One morning, as he sat at the kitchen table tapping through emails on his tablet, I placed a cup of coffee in front of him and casually said, "Our anniversary is coming up." He didn't look up. Yes, 40 years. A flick of his finger on the screen. Hard to believe. I forced a soft laugh. I was thinking we should celebrate. Something big. Something memorable. That made him pause. He lifted his eyes and studied me, his brow tightening just enough to reveal his suspicion. "A big celebration," he repeated. "Why?" I shrugged gently, keeping my voice light. "Because 40 years is rare. And people admire us, Christian. They admire you. It might be nice to let everyone honor what you've built." The moment I said it, a small spark lit behind his eyes, vanity disguised as modest interest. He leaned back in his chair, smoothing the sleeve of his shirt with exaggerated nonchalance. He murmured, pretending he wasn't already tempted. "I suppose. Though planning something like that is a lot of work, I'll handle it," I said, all of it. He liked that. He liked when things were done for him, when he didn't have to lift a finger unless it was to take credit later. "And what exactly are you imagining?" he asked. "A formal gathering," I said softly. "Elegant, warm, something befitting your reputation." His suspicion slipped into pleasure. He loved the idea of a room full of people praising him, admiring him. He loved the idea of being celebrated as a brilliant doctor, a devoted husband, a man who saved lives. He had always been addicted to applause, far more than he had ever been addicted to truth. Within an hour, he was suggesting menus, venues, even talking about which hospital donors would be impressed by something grand. I nodded at every request, agreeing, encouraging, letting him believe I was swept up in the romance of our milestone. He never questioned why I never showed him the guest list. He never asked to see the invitation design. He never checked to make sure anything was actually being booked. He just assumed I was doing it all out of devotion. I created digital invitations on my laptops, simple, classy, with our names in soft gold script. At the top, it read, "Celebrating 40 years of commitment, love, and legacy." I almost laughed at the last word. Instead, I sent the invitations out one by one, carefully curating the guest list without ever consulting him. Hospital administrators, board members, colleagues who revered him, donors who adored his polished charm. And then, beneath those names, folded quietly among them, I added the women from the support group. Every single one. I entered their names with a sense of reverence, like placing stones on sacred ground. Finally, I sent an invitation to an investigative journalist I trusted, someone who had spent years exposing medical corruption, someone who would know exactly what to do with the stories the women were ready to share. When Christian asked, "Are we getting RSVPs?" I smiled sweetly and said, "The party planner is handling all the responses." He didn't ask another question. The night of the celebration arrived with soft lighting and warm music filling the rented hall. Candles flickered along long tables draped in linen, and guests murmured in clusters, their voices gentle and admiring. The room smelled faintly of champagne and fresh lilies. Everything looked beautiful, almost dreamlike, and I felt a strange calm settle into my bones, like the stillness right before a storm when you know the world is about to change. Christian stepped into the room like a king entering his own coronation. His smile was wide, polished, practiced. People approached him with handshakes, stories, compliments. He basked in them all, letting each admiring word roll over him like warm water. He placed a possessive hand on my back now and then, guiding me, claiming me, reminding everyone that his perfect life included a perfect wife. I stood beside him and played my part flawlessly, but inside I watched him with a quiet, simmering clarity I had never felt before. Every word he spoke felt like a performance, every gesture a lie. He bragged about surgeries he'd performed, breakthroughs he'd supposedly contributed to, patients he had rescued. I heard the women's voices in my head, stories of the harms he'd done, the pain he'd inflicted, the lives he had twisted under the guise of care. At one point, he laughed loudly, telling someone, "My patients trust me completely. They know I'd never steer them wrong." The sentence hit me like a cold wind. I looked at him, really looked, and felt something in me shift. Not anger, not fear, something quieter, deeper, a kind of release. Across the room, I spotted them, the women from the support group. They stood near the back, together, dressed beautifully, but carrying a kind of solemn resolve in their expressions. When our eyes met, they nodded gently, and I nodded back. They belonged there as much as anyone else, more even. The journalist stood nearby, observing everything with an attentive, measured gaze. Christian noticed none of it. For the next hour, he drifted from group to group, smiling, boasting, owning the space as though it had been built for him. And maybe, in a way, it had. This was his world: admiration, power, deception polished into charm. I held a glass of sparkling water and watched him from across the room, feeling the weight of every lie he'd ever told me pressing against my skin. And yet, for the first time, that weight didn't crush me. It simply reminded me of who he truly was, and who I no longer had to be. As he raised a glass in the center of the crowd, ready to give a speech about our 40 years of partnership, I whispered to myself, my voice no louder than a breath, "Enjoy it while you can," because the truth was already spreading through the room. And the night he had expected to be a tribute was slowly becoming the beginning of his unraveling. I thought I had already reached the limits of heartbreak. I believed that once you see the person you married break themselves in front of you with lies, that must surely be the deepest wound. But I was wrong. There was another pain waiting, one I never imagined I would have to feel. Not in this life, not from the person I brought into this world with my own trembling hands. It began 3 days after the anniversary party. Christian left early for the hospital, humming to himself, still intoxicated by all the praise he had soaked up that night. I watched him walk out the door with his briefcase and his perfect smile, and I felt a coldness settle in my spine. The kind that pushes you forward because going back would be lethal. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I made my way to his home office, the place I had entered only twice before under the pressure of fear. This time, I entered under something much heavier: purpose. I had never been able to access his private server. He kept it locked behind a small black device that looked like a simple external hard drive but required a fingerprint to open. I found it lying on the edge of his desk, as if he had grown careless from arrogance. Maybe he believed I had stopped searching. Maybe he believed he had frightened me back into my role. Arrogance makes people sloppy. I held the drive in my hands and stared at his computer. The screen demanded a fingerprint, and my heart pounded as I pressed his ring finger. Still stored in a small, clear sticker, I had peeled off one of his old coffee mugs. The scanner blinked green. The server opened. My breath trembled as line after line of folders appeared, each one labeled with the kind of cold efficiency only Christian possessed. Patient reviews, case notes, outreach, admin. But one folder caught my eye: internal issues. I clicked it. At first I saw spreadsheets, names I recognized from the support group, dates of procedures, payments, follow-up notes that were clinical and chilling in their indifference. But deeper in the folder was something else. Something that didn't belong in any medical archive. Emails. Dozens of them. Threads labeled problem patients, caused benefit notes, and risk management. Many were between Christian and a sender named E. Turner. My heart stalled for a moment, then thudded painfully as realization washed over me. Turner was Emily, my daughter. Our daughter. My hands shook violently as I opened the first message. It was dated 3 years ago. Emily wrote, "Dad, the woman from yesterday is crying again. She says you ignored symptoms that another doctor believes are serious. What do you want me to tell her?" Christian replied, "She's emotional. Calm her down. Schedule unnecessary tests if you must, but don't escalate anything. Frame her as anxious." Another email. "The patient from Tuesday is threatening to file a complaint. Should we be worried?" Christian, "She's broke. She won't pursue legal action once she sees the costs. Follow protocol." And then, the one that felt like a knife driven slow and deep into my chest. "Emily, Mom is asking questions. Should we be worried?" My vision blurred. I couldn't breathe. I read the email again, hoping I had misunderstood, hoping it said something else, anything else. But no, it was there. Her words. My daughter's voice translated into betrayal. Christian's reply came seconds later. "Handle it. She trusts you more than she trusts me." I felt something inside me collapse, softly at first, then all at once like a structure that had been cracked long ago, but finally lost its last support beam. A sound escaped me, small and broken, the kind of sound you make when your heart recognizes a truth your mind cannot yet handle. Emily knew, my daughter, my baby. The little girl whose hair I brushed when she cried after nightmares. The young woman I held during breakups, telling her she deserved honesty, love, protection. She knew what her father was doing. Not just to strangers, not just to vulnerable patients, but to me. She had read my medical reports. She had seen the neglected results. She had watched me weaken, day after day, year after year, and she said nothing. Worse, she helped him bury complaints from other victims. She helped him protect his reputation, his money, his power. She protected him from me. I pressed my forehead against the edge of the desk and sobbed quietly, the kind of sob that comes from the spine, not the throat. The kind that feels like mourning someone who is still alive. I tried to remind myself to breathe, but my body didn't understand how to move air anymore. My own daughter helped him deceive me. The grief was suffocating, heavy, but beneath it, something else was growing. Slowly, subtly, the way a flame licks at the base of dry wood. Anger. Not the wild, uncontrolled kind. Not the kind that lashes out without thought. This was quieter, steadier, sharper. A type of anger born from truth, not rage, but clarity. I sat up straight, wiping my face with shaking hands. I opened more emails, more chains, more proof. The deeper I went, the more undeniable the pattern became. Emily wasn't just aware. She was participating. She answered patient emails with scripts Christian had written. She processed refunds to silence complaints. She scheduled unnecessary appointments for women who trusted her gentle smile. She labeled innocent women as unstable, attention-seeking, non-compliant, echoing her father's cruelty with chilling precision. I saw my daughter's handwriting on digital notes, calm and professional. Patient exaggerates symptoms. Recommend minimal action. Concerns dismissed after review. Advise reassurance only. Mother is growing suspicious. Maintain distance until she stabilizes. Mother, mother, mother. As though I were a problem to manage. My tears dried slowly, replaced by a type of stillness that felt almost sacred. I took photos of everything. Every email thread, every file, every timestamp. I recorded the evidence carefully, methodically, just as Dr. Morrison would have done if this were a case in her own hands. My betrayal became documentation. My grief became fuel. My heartbreak became purpose. Something inside me hardened, not into stone, but into resolve. I loved Emily more than anything. But loving someone does not mean closing your eyes while they hurt you. I closed the server and held the device in both hands, staring at my reflection in its glossy surface. My face looked older, sadder, but also clearer than I had ever seen it. I whispered into the silence of the office, my voice trembling but firm. You chose him, but I choose justice. The house felt different, then echoing, hollow, as though its walls had heard the truth and absorbed it. I opened the windows to let in the cold afternoon air, letting it wash over me like a cleansing ritual. I needed to breathe something pure, something untouched by lies. The betrayal nearly destroyed me, but it also sharpened me. I rose slowly, gathering the evidence into a folder on my phone. My legs were weak, but my purpose was strong. For the first time in years, I felt a kind of movement in my chest that had nothing to do with illness, something rising, expanding, pushing me forward. Anger didn't swallow me, it steadied me. My daughter had broken my heart, but she also pushed me to see the truth in its full, painful shape. And once you see the truth, fully, clearly, you cannot unsee it, and you cannot go back. I didn't intend to break down in Dr. Morrison's office. I had walked in telling myself I'd be composed, that I would simply update her on what I had found, ask a few questions, and leave. But the moment she stepped into the room and offered that steady, gentle smile, the kind someone gives you when they truly see your suffering, the weight I had been carrying finally tipped. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words collapsed before they could form, dissolving into a tremor that started in my throat and spread downward until my whole body shook. I covered my face with my hands, ashamed of the rawness spilling out of me. "I'm sorry," I whispered through the tears. Everything is, I couldn't finish. The room blurred. I felt her hand on my shoulder, warm and grounding, not rushed or fearful of the emotion. She waited. She gave me a moment to simply breathe, and in that silence, something inside me loosened. "Take your time," she said softly. I lowered my hands slowly. "It's worse than I thought," I managed. "Christian and Emily." My voice cracked on my daughter's name. "He's done things. 2 others, and she helped him." Her expression tensed with recognition, not surprise, not confusion, but understanding. And then, after a long breath, she said the words that changed the temperature of the room. "I've suspected Christian for years." I stared at her, stunned. She looked down, rubbing her thumb along the edge of my chart before continuing. "I even filed a report once, quietly. Nothing official enough to trigger retaliation, but enough to raise a flag. Her voice tightened with contained frustration. It didn't matter. His connections blocked it before it even reached the board. I felt a chill run through me, not from fear this time, but from the realization that I had finally found someone who wasn't afraid to speak the truth out loud. Someone who had already tried to stop him. Someone who cared. "He hurt so many people," I whispered, "and he made me feel like I was losing my mind." Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. "That's what people like him do. They chip away at your confidence until you can't tell the difference between concern and hysteria. They make you doubt your own body." She took a seat beside me, not across the room, not behind a desk right next to me. "But you're not doubting anymore, Sandra. And that's the part he feared the most." I swallowed hard. I found emails, notes, records. Emily, she knew. She helped him hide complaints. She watched what he was doing to me. A flash of sadness crossed her face. "I'm so sorry." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. "I don't know how to move forward," I admitted. "I feel like everything is shattered and I'm walking barefoot through the pieces." "Then we'll walk through them together," she said. Her voice was calm, firm. "This time, we'll build an ironclad case." I looked at her, really looked at her. The determined curve of her jaw, the quiet fire in her eyes. She wasn't offering sympathy. She was offering help. Real help. "Why me?" I asked quietly. "Because you came forward," she said. "And because you're not alone. You have evidence, you have witnesses, and you have the strength to see this through. That makes you powerful, Sandra. Far more powerful than he ever expected." A shaky breath escaped me, halfway between relief and fear. "What do I need to do?" "There's someone you need to meet," she said gently. "A lawyer who specializes in medical ethics and systemic malpractice. His name is David Chun. I've referred a few patients to him in the past. He's sharp, principled, and he does not scare easily." Her confidence settled into me like a warm weight. She stepped out briefly and returned a minute later with a man in his 40s, dark hair, thin glasses, calm eyes that held a kind of quiet intelligence. He offered his hand. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "I'm David." His voice was steady and respectful, without pity or performative concern. I shook his hand and felt something surprising. Safety. Dr. Morrison gestured for us to sit, and I watched as David opened a slim laptop and a legal pad. "Dr. Morrison gave me a brief overview," he said. "She mentioned you have documents." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. "I do." He took it gently, opened the folder of photographs, and began scrolling. His eyes sharpened within seconds. He leaned closer, scrolled slower, then he exhaled. "This isn't negligence," he said, almost to himself. "This is criminal fraud." My heart thudded. Hearing it confirmed by a lawyer made everything suddenly real. He continued reviewing the evidence, C-mails, test results, handwritten notes. He falsified medical interpretations, he said, tapping a photo of the results. He deliberately misled patients. He financially exploited at least one, possibly more. "There are more," I whispered. "There's a support group." He looked up. "How many?" 8 women, I said. "All harmed by him. Different stories, but the patterns, they're the same." For the first time, David leaned back in his chair. Eyes widening, not with shock, but with something sharper, strategic calculation. "This isn't just a malpractice case," he said. "This is systemic abuse, coordinated deception, a network of silence." Dr. Morrison folded her arms. "Which is why we need a systemic case." I watched the two of them exchange a brief, decisive look, one that told me they had worked together before, one that told me they were already forming a plan. David turned to me. "Mrs. Mitchell Sandred, you have no idea how important you are in this. You're the connective thread. You have evidence from inside his home, direct documentation of decisions, communications, concealment, and with the support group." He shook his head. almost impressed. This could dismantle everything he built. My breath trembled. It feels enormous. It is, he said, but you won't be doing it alone. Something warm flickered in my chest, small, but real. For so long, I had been isolated, silenced, doubted. Now, sitting between a doctor who believed me and a lawyer who took me seriously, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt held. What happens now? I asked. We start quietly, David said. Very quietly. We build a timeline. We corroborate witnesses. We prepare statements. We organize the documents into categories. We map out every pattern, every inconsistency, every fraudulent claim. And then, he said, we strike. Dr. Morrison placed her hand over mine. This time, Sandra, the truth will not be buried. I stared at her hand, steady, warm, unwavering, and I felt my throat tighten with emotion. I couldn't fully name. Gratitude, relief, fear, hope. For the first time since everything began, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I had allies. Real ones. Strong ones. Ones who saw the full picture and didn't flinch. I gathered my purse, my phone, my courage. As I stood to leave, David said gently, "Whatever happens, we will protect you." I nodded, unable to speak. I stepped into the hallway, a place that had once felt sterile and cold, and I realized I was walking differently, straighter, slower, with a sense of quiet resolve. The three of us, me, Dr. Morrison, and David, were beginning something silent and powerful. Not an act of revenge, but an act of truth. And truth, I was learning, could be its own form of justice. The first signals came quietly, the way storms begin with a shift in the air rather than thunder. Sandra knew the investigation had started because David had warned her what the early steps would look like. Small requests, routine inquiries that would seem almost harmless from the outside. But Christian had built his empire on the illusion that he was untouchable. And even the softest knock at the foundation was enough to make the whole structure tremble. The medical board contacted the clinic for routine verification of records. Christian brushed it off in front of his staff, laughing that bureaucracy was finally doing its job instead of slowing his down. But Sandra noticed the tension in the way he pulled at his shirt collar, the way he stared for too long at the printed notice before shoving it into his desk drawer. That night at dinner, he barely spoke. He ate quickly, stabbing at his food with short, irritated motions. Sandra moved quietly around the kitchen, the soft sounds of plates and silverware the only thing filling the heavy silence. Nothing in her face betrayed what she knew. She had become good at that, hiding her entire internal landscape behind a composed softness. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp, almost feverish. "Did someone from the board contact you?" he asked. Sandra let the question float in the air, as if it was almost amusing. She tilted her head, pretending to search her memory. "No," she said gently. "Why would they?" Christian stared at her, seeking something beneath her calm expression. She met his gaze with the careful openness of a woman who has nothing to hide. He looked away first. Over the next days, the pressure increased. The clinic received requests for old patient files, some dating back a decade. A financial audit appeared quiet, procedural, but unmistakably triggered by something bigger. Christian's temper shortened, doors closed harder. His voice grew sharp with the staff. Emily, their daughter, kept glancing at him with worry etched across her forehead, though she avoided Sandra's eyes entirely now. Sandra watched it all with an unsettling mix of sorrow and satisfaction. She had never wanted revenge. She had never wanted destruction. She only wanted truth. But truth, she had learned, was not gentle. It was a blade that cut through every lie, every illusion, every fragile excuse someone had been clinging to. And Christian had built an entire life out of illusions. One evening, he came home later than usual, slamming the front door so hard the picture frames rattled. Sandra was sitting on the couch, a book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page for the last 20 minutes. She looked up as he stormed into the living room. "Are you talking to anyone about my practice?" he demanded, his breath uneven, his hands trembling slightly. His voice wasn't loud, but there was a dangerous tightness beneath it, a barely suppressed panic. Sandra blinked slowly, letting a gentle confusion wash over her features. "Of course not," she answered softly. "Why would I?" He studied her again, more desperately this time. The silence stretched thin between them. Sandra kept her breathing steady, her body still. She knew that if she showed even one crack in her composure, he would pounce. Years of living with him had taught her the importance of stillness. Eventually, he exhaled sharply, muttered something under his breath, and left the room. She waited until she heard his office door slam shut before allowing her shoulders to sag. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed her book. She hated lying, even to a man who had built his entire life on deceit. But there was no other way now. Justice required secrecy. The next morning, Christian arrived at his practice with a new kind of frenzy. He shut himself in his private office and began deleting files. Sandra knew this because she had access to the server logs from her secret copies. Every deletion confirmed his guilt. Every frantic attempt to erase the past only strengthened the case against him. He didn't know she had copied everything long before the investigation began. He didn't know the truth was already out of his hands. Meanwhile, the journalist Sandra had quietly invited to the anniversary party was making her own moves. The article appeared online on a Tuesday morning, subtle but powerful, like a seed planted in the middle of a dry field waiting for one spark to ignite it. The headline was careful, not accusatory. Growing concerns surrounding a local cardiology center. Patients speak of irregularities. It didn't mention Christian by name, but everyone in the medical community knew exactly whom it referred to. The article referenced anonymous accounts of misdiagnoses, unnecessary procedures, unexplained billing patterns, and a culture of intimidation that discouraged second opinions. Sandra read the article slowly, her chest tightening with a strange blend of grief and validation. Seeing it printed, seeing the truth finally acknowledged, brought tears to her eyes. Not because she felt triumphant, but because the weight she had carried for so long finally began to lift. The years of doubt, the fear that she was imagining things, the layers of emotional manipulation. Each sentence in that article peeled away another layer of the prison he had built around her. Christian saw the article within minutes of arriving at work. His office door slammed so hard the receptionist flinched. Emily rushed in after him, frantic, whispering something Sandra couldn't hear. But she could imagine the panic, the anger, the dread. Later that afternoon, Christian came home early. He paced the kitchen like a trapped animal, muttering, swearing, stopping only to look at Sandra with wounded suspicion. "Someone is trying to destroy me," he said. "Someone with access. Someone who knows too much." Sandra folded a dish towel carefully, smoothing the edges as if the fabric itself needed reassurance. "I'm sorry you're going through this," she said softly. Her voice was calm, nearly tender, not mocking, just quiet, controlled. And that calmness seemed to unsettle him more than any argument could. For the first time in years, she felt the balance in their marriage shift, not because she held power over him, but because she no longer needed anything from him. Not his approval, not his explanations, not his version of reality. She had her own truth now, her own direction, her own strength. And as the investigation quietly grew around him, as his world began to crack from the inside, Sandra felt something long, dormant rising in her chest, something both painful and exhilarating. Hope. The discovery came on a quiet night, the kind of evening where the house feels too still, as if every wall is holding its breath. Sandra had grown used to the heaviness of secrets. Hers. Everyone's, but something in the air that night pulled her toward answers she wasn't sure she wanted to find. Christian had fallen asleep in his office chair, a half-finished glass of whiskey at his elbow. The dim light from the desk lamp cast harsh shadows across his face, deepening every line carved by stress and fear. Sandra stood in the doorway for a moment, studying him. Once, his sleeping form had made her feel safe, comforted. But now she saw only the remnants of the mask he had worn for decades. She stepped softly into the room and moved behind the desk. She knew the password to his email. It was always the same. His own birthday. A man obsessed with himself rarely deviated from predictable patterns. She expected to find deleted messages, perhaps correspondence with lawyers trying to salvage what remained of his reputation. She did not expect what she found. A string of transfers. Regular, calculated, cold. Amounts large enough to leave their retirement account bleeding. The destination. Offshore banks in countries known for secrecy. And then, nestled among the confirmation emails, she saw something that made her breath leave her in a painful rush. 2 plane tickets, but only 1 passenger name. Christian Mitchell. Departure in 6 days. Destination. A country with no extradition treaty. He was leaving, not with her, not even pretending anymore. He was prepared to abandon her to the wreckage he created. Sandra stared at the screen until the words blurred. She felt something inside her chest, something tender, something hopeful, finally fall quiet. If earlier betrayals had cracked her heart, this one crushed whatever innocence remained. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stop a sound she wasn't sure was a sob or a laugh. The cruelty of it, the cowardice, the sheer selfishness. It hollowed her and filled her at the same time with clarity. Not rage, not sorrow, but certainty. He would run. She would not. She closed the laptop gently, as if sealing the final chapter of a book she'd taken too long to finish. She stood straighter, feeling the weight in her spine lift, vertebra by vertebra. When she glanced at Christian again, slumped sideways in his chair, she felt no pity and no longing. Just truth. And the truth wasn't cruel. It was cleansing. The kind of weather that steadies a person. Sandra stood before the mirror in the bedroom and fastened. A pair of pearl earrings Christian had given her decades earlier. She didn't wear them for sentiment. She wore them as a quiet, final reclaiming of herself. They no longer symbolized his love. They symbolized her endurance. She chose a slate blue dress, simple, elegant, unassuming. The kind of outfit that made people underestimate her, right until she opened her mouth. Her hands barely trembled as she slid on her coat. By the time she reached the courthouse, David Chun and Dr. Morrison were already waiting inside. Both stood when she entered, and Sandra felt something warm settle inside her chest. She was no longer doing this alone. David gave her a slight nod, the kind that carried whole paragraphs of reassurance. "You ready?" he murmured. Sandra inhaled deeply. "Yes," she said. More than ready. They entered the hearing room together. Christian was already there, sitting at a long table with his attorney. His face was pale, drawn, the skin around his eyes bruised from sleepless nights. He glanced around the room anxiously, then froze when he saw her. Sandra watched the moment recognition hit him, the flicker of panic, the realization that she wasn't at home, crying, confused, powerless. She was here, present, composed, and she was not on his side. His mouth parted slightly, as though he meant to speak her name, but no sound came. Sandra walked with steady, measured steps to the front of the room as her name was called. People made space for her without hesitation. She felt the eyes of administrators, board members, lawyers, and observers settle on her. She felt none of their weight. Her own truth held her upright. When she reached the witness stand, she paused, smoothing her dress, taking in the stillness of the room. She could sense Christian watching her with a frantic, pleading edge, as though even now he hoped she would save him. Sandra lifted her chin. "My name is Sandra Mitchell," she began, her voice soft but unmistakably clear, "and today I will tell the truth about the man I thought I knew." The room shifted. Even the air seemed to lean closer. She could feel Christian unraveling behind her, but she didn't turn. She didn't need to see his face to know that the foundation of his world was collapsing. For years she had been silenced by fear, by doubt, by love twisted into something unrecognizable. But standing there, surrounded by people who finally wanted to listen, she felt every piece of herself realign. Her voice had weight again. Her story had purpose. She spoke of his manipulation, of symptoms dismissed, of medications withheld, of patients she'd met whose lives he had damaged. She spoke with restraint, with dignity, her pain offered not as vengeance, but as truth. Every word reclaimed a part of her she had lost, and though her heart trembled at times, it was not with fear, it was with release. For the first time in a very long time, Sandra felt free. The betrayal that had nearly broken her had instead reforged her into something stronger, more resolute. She was not the woman who once asked permission to speak. She was not the wife who once looked at her husband and thought he was the center of her life. She was the woman standing before a board of medical officials, peeling back the layers of a man who had thrived on secrecy. She was the truth teller, the witness, the one who couldn't be quieted anymore. Her voice didn't shake when she finished. Her hands didn't tremble as she stepped away. When she finally allowed herself one brief glance toward Christian, she saw him hunched over, drained of color, staring at her as though seeing a stranger. But she wasn't the stranger. He was. Sandra walked out of the room with her shoulders straight and her breath steady. Outside, the cold air wrapped around her in a way that felt almost like an embrace, a promise of the life waiting for her beyond this moment. A life she would build not from fear, but from truth. And as she stepped down the courthouse steps, she felt it. The unmistakable beginning of her own rebirth. I walked into that courtroom carrying a weight I had spent years pretending wasn't real. Yet for the first time, it didn't bend my spine, it steadied me. I felt every step as if the ground itself were acknowledging that something long silenced was finally rising to speak. When I sat down, the folders on my lap felt heavier than paper. They were years of nights I lay awake thinking I was losing my mind. Years of being told I was dramatic. Years of trusting a man who used my trust as a shield for his crimes. When the board asked me to present my evidence, my hands didn't shake. I opened the files the same way someone opens a window in a stuffy room, with relief, with purpose, with the certainty that light was long overdue. I laid out Christian's forged notes, the ones rewriting my pain into something mild. I showed the ignored test results, the fraudulent procedures performed on women who had walked into his office believing they were safe. I heard a few muffled gasps, but I didn't look up. I wasn't here to witness their shock. I was here to reclaim myself. The support group women sat behind me in the front row. I could feel their presence like a warm hand pressed between my shoulder blades. One by one, they stood. Their voices broke, trembled, sometimes stumbled over words swollen with grief and humiliation. But they kept going. Each testimony was a stone placed carefully into the growing wall of truth we were building, a wall strong enough to keep Christian's lies from slithering back through the cracks. Then Emily was called. My daughter walked forward as if pulled by a string. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and when she took her seat, she looked everywhere except at me. The silence in the room thickened until she finally whispered, "I was afraid." Her voice shook. "Dad said he'd lose everything if anyone talked. He told me I owed him my loyalty, that you were overreacting. I believed him. I'm so sorry, Mom." Something inside me cracked. Not a clean break, but the kind that leaks pain slowly, silently. I didn't speak. I didn't trust my voice. I just nodded, because forgiveness is a road, not a door, and I knew I hadn't reached the end of it yet. But at least she had stepped onto it. Christian's face, though. He didn't crumble. He didn't cry. He looked cornered, exposed, furious, but mostly offended, as if all of this were merely an inconvenience. But watching Emily break under the truth did something no document could. It stripped away the last layer of protection he had. The board didn't deliberate long. His license was revoked immediately. When the decision was read, Christian opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I had waited years to hear him speechless. The quiet was beautiful. Criminal charges were filed soon after, and when I filed for divorce, the judge froze his offshore accounts and awarded me everything legally mine and everything he had tried to steal. Money didn't heal the wounds, but it did give me something he never wanted me to have: freedom to rebuild. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the small office of our new patient advocacy nonprofit, a place born out of pain but built on the hope that no woman would ever sit alone, doubting her own reality, the way we once had. The support group women were now my partners, my friends, my witnesses to survival. Dr. Morrison volunteered weekly, offering calm guidance and that steady voice that had pulled me back from the edge the very first day she uttered, "We'll take this step by step." On the evening of our first community event, I stood in the tiny restroom of the community center, studying my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in decades, I didn't see hesitation in my face. I didn't see someone begging to be believed. I saw a woman with roots strong enough to break through concrete. A woman who had been buried and still found a way to reach the sun. My eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. They settled there gently, like a reminder of everything I'd survived. And then, almost without thinking, I whispered to my reflection, for years he made me believe I was weak. But surviving him proved I was never weak at all. And now, I'm just getting started. I drew a long breath, straightened my blouse, and smiled at myself, not out of vanity, but out of recognition, out of reunion, out of gratitude for the version of me that refused to die quietly. And if you've walked this far with me, if my voice found you at the right moment, then stay close. Our stories matter. Our healing matters. And together we can make sure no one walks through their darkest hour alone again. So if my journey touched your heart, I'd be honored to have you with me. Subscribe to the channel, join our community, and let's keep growing stronger, not just in spite of what hurt us, but because we rose beyond it.